pages of ancient history and divine revelation, there are many stories that hold deep moral and spiritual lessons for humankind. One such powerful story is about the people of Hazrat Dawood, A.S., and how, through their disobedience, they faced a punishment unlike any other in human history. The Quran and various Islamic traditions tell us about a community among the children of Israel who lived during the time of Prophet Dawood, A.S. They were blessed by Allah with knowledge, prosperity, and access to the divine law. Yet, over time, their hearts grew hard. They began to twist the laws of Allah to suit their desires and material interests. Among their greatest tests was the command regarding the Sabbath, the holy day of rest. Allah had ordered them not to engage in any worldly work or trade on that day. It was meant to be a day of worship, reflection, and gratitude. But greed took hold of their hearts. The very people who were supposed to be an example of obedience began plotting ways to bypass divine command. These people lived near the sea, and on the Sabbath, the fish would come to the surface in great numbers. Yet on other days, the fish would disappear. This was a direct test from Allah to see who would remain faithful. The people, instead of obeying, devised a cunning plan. They would dig small canals and traps on Friday, allowing fish to swim in during the Sabbath and remain trapped until Sunday. Then they would catch them, claiming they had not technically broken the command. But Allah is all-knowing. No one can deceive Him. What they thought was a clever loophole was, in truth, a direct act of rebellion. There were three groups among the people. The first group obeyed Allah and stayed away from sin. The second group disobeyed and engaged in this deceitful fishing. The third group didn't participate, but also didn't stop the wrongdoers. They remained silent. The righteous people warned the sinners again and again. "Fear Allah," they said. "Do not transgress His limits." But the arrogant ones mocked them and continued. When their arrogance reached its peak, Allah's punishment descended. The Quran describes it in Surah Al-A'raf. So when they insolently persisted in what they had been forbidden, we said to them, "Be apes, despised." In an instant, their forms were changed. Those who disobeyed were turned into monkeys, humiliated and degraded. Their transformation was not just physical, but symbolic, a reflection of the spiritual corruption within them. According to Islamic scholars, they did not live long after this transformation. Their punishment was a warning to all future generations that disobedience and mockery of divine law lead to destruction. The story carries profound lessons. It shows that the commands of Allah are not to be played with. Even if one tries to find loopholes or justify sin with clever reasoning, Allah knows what lies in every heart. It also reminds us that silence in the face of wrongdoing is dangerous. The righteous must speak out and guide others toward the truth. Prophet Dawood, A.S., a man of wisdom and devotion, observed this event as a clear sign from Allah that those who defy Him out of arrogance and greed invite their own downfall. This story is not just a tale from the past. It is a reminder for us today. How often do people try to justify wrong actions by twisting words or laws? How often do they ignore moral responsibility for the sake of convenience? The story of the people of Hazrat Dawood, A.S., teaches us that true faith means obedience, sincerity, and humility before the Creator. May Allah grant us wisdom to learn from their story, to obey His commands sincerely, and to never be among those who test His patience. This is not merely a historical story. It is a timeless warning that those who forget Allah and mock His guidance eventually lose their own humanity. As the story continues, we learn that the punishment of the people who disobeyed Allah's command became a lesson for everyone around them. After they were transformed into monkeys, the neighboring tribes and the obedient followers of Hazrat Dawood, A.S., witnessed their fate with shock and fear. The once proud and arrogant people were now wandering helplessly, unable to speak or express themselves, only able to make the sounds of animals. It is said in Islamic traditions that the transformed people lived only a few days. After this divine punishment, they could recognize their relatives, But their families could not bear to see them in such a state. They tried to communicate, but their words were replaced by cries and gestures. The humiliation was total. They had lost both their physical form and their human dignity. Hazrat Dawood, a prophet known for his deep connection with Allah and his beautiful recitation of the Zabur, wept for their condition. He prayed to Allah, asking for forgiveness for his people and for guidance for those who remained. Through this event, Allah made it clear that His mercy is vast, but His justice is firm. The people who had obeyed Allah and remained steadfast were deeply moved. They realized that true faith is not just about performing rituals, but about sincerity and obedience, even when no one is watching. They renewed their covenant with Allah and promised never to test His commandments again. The story of these people spread far and wide. Generations after them remembered it as a warning from the Almighty. Even today, this story is mentioned in the Quran and in Islamic teachings to remind believers of the consequences of disobedience and hypocrisy. The transformation into monkeys was not merely physical, it represented their moral downfall. They had acted with cunning and deceit, behaving like animals driven by greed and desire. So Allah turned them into what they had become within, a living mirror of their spiritual corruption. This event teaches us several lessons that remain relevant for all times. First, it warns against trying to deceive Allah's commandments. No matter how clever our reasoning, Allah sees the truth of our intentions. Second, it teaches us the importance of enjoining good and forbidding evil. The people who stayed silent in the face of wrongdoing were spared from transformation, but they were still questioned by Allah for their silence. Their fear and hesitation nearly cost them their safety. And finally, the story teaches us humility. The people of Hazrat Dawood, were once strong, intelligent, and prosperous, yet a single act of rebellion erased all of that in a moment. This shows that pride in wealth, intellect, or status is meaningless without obedience to the Creator. After this incident, Hazrat Dawood, reminded his people to hold fast to faith, justice, and honesty. He told them that those who seek Allah's pleasure will never be humiliated, and those who rebel will never find peace. His words became a source of wisdom for generations, guiding people to walk on the straight path with sincerity. This story is not just history. It is a reflection of human behavior. It warns us against arrogance, greed, and hypocrisy. It reminds us that when people twist divine rules for their benefit, they lose the very blessing they were given. If we wish to stay safe from Allah's anger, we must be truthful in our faith and actions. We must remember that Allah's tests are not punishments. They are opportunities to prove our loyalty and love for Him. So let this story of the people of Hazrat Dawood, live in our hearts as a reminder that every blessing, every law, and every command of Allah is for our own good. And those who rebel against Him, despite clear warnings, only bring destruction upon themselves. May we learn from their fate and remain among those who obey with sincerity. Trust in Allah's wisdom and live by His guidance, for that is the path to peace in this world and eternal success in the hereafter. As time passed, the story of the people who were transformed spread across the land. Tribes that lived miles away heard about the shocking event that had occurred among the followers of Hazrat Dawood, The tale became a symbol of Allah's absolute justice and the severe consequences of defiance. Parents began warning their children never to play with the laws of Allah, and scholars spoke about it in their gatherings, reminding everyone that Allah's tests are not to be taken lightly. Hazrat Dawood, in his wisdom and humility, continued to guide his people with patience and firmness. He would often gather them and speak about the